Okay, welcome everybody to today's episode of PropTech Talks, where we talk with real estate executives, investors, founders, discussing nuances in the industry today and how to capitalize on them.
I'm the CTO of Buro Happold. I've been working with Buro Happold teams since 2014, and I was, really privileged to meet a number of, really exciting people that are trying to attempt difficult things in the built environment on behalf of their clients. So, it's that huge conversation between the client and its engineers and its architects, and that team creating intervention, whether it's a refurb, a redevelopment, an economic intervention through master planning, or even a building. And the type of clients have difficult questions like, we need to open something for the millennium. We can't be late. We don't have a budget, and we don't know what's going to be in the space for the millennium, and we don't know what's going to be in the space after the millennium, so it needs to be highly flexible. Right. That's an interesting question, right? Mm-hmm. And so then you address that question, not to people that are calculating how big the beam needs to be or how does the facade complies to fire regulation. You address it to a group of engineers that like to think out of the box. And that's the people I found at Buro Happold. And then their answer is, here is a proposal. Sometimes it gets selected, sometimes not. In this case, yes, it got selected because the Millennium Dome is with us. It's the most efficient structure that you can build at the lowest possible cost. That's the highest flexibility, and it's a huge amount of effort. But it's the view of the engineer. I'm going to make a really efficient structure because efficiency is often aligned to elegance, because nature is efficient, or brain like natural things. Yeah. And it's usually cost effective. So there we go. So you meet, I met those people at Buro Happold, and of course they wanted to leverage technology. But they want to leverage technology in the transformation they deliver to the customer, and they wanted to deliver technology in powering and augmenting their art and their conversation. So as soon as you have that statement, then the opening question, what should be our BIM plan? What should be our BIM program? Very quickly says, but what do you want? How does it help the conversation with the customer? How does it help us do more computation, more iteration? How does it help us create buildings like the Abu Dhabi Louvre? Now, the Abu Dhabi Louvre is a dome assembled out of 6,000 pieces of metal that are cut in Austria. Mm-hmm. You're not going to do that on an Excel spreadsheet and PDFs. It's just not possible. It's not feasible. Every single one is different. So you find an opportunity, which I had, I'm really thankful for, to work with those engineers and put in place, relentlessly adopt. And now we're 3,500, make people think how you use technology. And one of them is the semantic representation of the design, which is called BIM. And it's encoded into what client can specify and procure so that this information is usable by multiple parties. So it's great. But the big picture of why Buro Happold got into it is they are attempting transformational projects. And if you are attempting that in the 21st century, you're going to bring technology with you. You want the strongest possible toolbox available, yes. Right? And that's the conversation I've been privileged to participate in. Mm-hmm. And then my personal life is that because I came from another industry, yes, where again, through complete serendipity, I'm a digital guy creating low-cost digital signal processing chips for new application. And again, I sit on we've got this new technology, what do we do with it? And yeah, I'm surrounded with people that say, oh, there's a new standard, it's called Bluetooth, it could be interesting. So they build a Bluetooth chip. Right? And I'm presented with, well, actually, British Gas has this question, can we replace the mechanical things with an electronic gas meter? And say, well, I could put that chip into there and create an electric gas meter. So I arrive at Michelin in the automotive industry, and their problem was the customer doesn't really want to buy a car, right? In the B2B segment, but you want to buy a mile. Now, selling a mile is extremely complicated because you need to know where the truck is. You're going to need to check every truck. You're going to need to organize and plan to go and intervene on the truck. Then you'll have to account every tire you've put and then try to reconcile whether you're making money because you're charging enough for all the tires you're putting in and all the service. Now, in a world of pen and paper, it's possible, but it's only possible in an edge case. In this case, the London buses, because you know where they start, and so London buses have been buying tires on the basis of give me my monthly cost for this line. But it's not possible for the general case. And so my observation was the cost of process and the cost of information goes to zero. So the definition of digital transformation is the marginal cost of information and capability is going to zero. So if the marginal cost of information goes to zero, because ultimately you're working with a logistician, he knows where the truck is. You're working with a logistician, it's planning to arrive at the back of a Tesco store within 20 minutes. So asking them, when is your truck next stop for an hour, and then map that to where my 500 service vans are, and then organize an intersection between that service van and it's going to cost zero very soon. Not yet, it's 1995, but very soon. So he says, when do I start building? Well, I need to make sure the commercial offer works, the organization offer works, my contracts work. So you start very early, knowing that within a few more low cycle, your cost to serve is going to go to zero, and it's a completely new way of doing it. And so then you come to the built environment and you go, what's going on here? And what's going on here? 2006, what's going on here? And you develop at the same time a deep respect for what is going on, and then a deep realization that it's societal is an important, is where we live, right? Metaverse, nice, but I don't live there yet. So you meet all these people, and then you say, but technology is not helping you. And then you start understanding the structure of the industry. You start to understand that technology could help, but actually it's like that edge case is like very few places because the technology is not powerful enough. We are the most complex ecosystem, right? When we say we are the least digitized, it's true, but it's also possibly because it's the hardest to digitize.
Yeah.
Right? So, and I come back to my experience at Michelin. Michelin was organized geographically based on how you would share information. And, the customer would buy a tire from a retailer. The retailer would place an order with his tire maker. It all would happen over the phone and people, etc. But then when computer became powerful enough to capture all that demand, connect the EPOS, etc., then you'd say, I don't need to be organized geographically. I need to be organized around my customer. And so you completely reorganize the organization based on the available communication and technology, right? What's the size of a province in the UK is how long it takes you to travel from one end to the other, 2 days on horseback. So fundamentally, the information and communication technology stack that you have at your disposal shapes how you organize and deliver and do your business. So now you come back to construction and says, how might we? And so obviously the governments, like the UK government, says, how might we organize ourselves differently to deliver what we want, right? So it's really interesting. For example, I worked with the German government and their arm Deutsche Bahn. Deutsche Bahn is there to support the federal fabric of the country. So, for example, you know that because you can buy a ticket, an annual ticket, all you can eat of going around the train network in Germany. So they build the network so that you can have dual headquarters status, for example, between Berlin and Frankfurt, etc. People can move. But then you say, how do I make this network run better, right? And so then you say, where can digital help, right? And so you quickly go into, is it predictive analytics? Is it in reducing the risk of delivery of tunnels? Is it constructing stations faster? Or is it driving revenue in the station and creating stations that are more places of arrival, place of trade, and therefore actually those stations and the community around King's Cross, the community around Euston demonstrate that that's the right way to think about it.
It it seems that often there is a problem to solve, and upon solving it, it solves a cascade of 50 problems you didn't even really know were problems, but are now better. And my my I I guess my own hypothesis on built environment is that sustainability is showing signs that it might provide the same sort of result. And the reason I say that, you have um, you have methods of solving sustainability which come from utilizing data better. But when you utilize data better, a cascade of new things are solved by cutting certain costs down on a building. You actually find that because you have to for sustainability, you actually find that this building can be used in a superior way. There's almost an activation energy that you need to go there, and then it's
I mean, that's a whole new podcast, but so much, right? And to
I feel like we could talk for many hours.
to an investor in real estate, right? I think an investor is looking for a level of predictable return with upside.
Yes.
And I think what you just described is what's my baseline and what's my upside. And technology is so little adopted, right? You have to say, we have to say to ourselves, either we really don't need it, which would be quite an outlier, like every other industry needs it, but we don't.
Yeah.
Unlikely. Or we have to make it work. And those that are going to make it work are going to collect that upside.
Yeah.
So I observe that a construction company set up in the current way doesn't really see an upside from, show me companies in construction that have gone bust because they didn't adopt technology. Not many.
Yes.
If any. Show me those that were too early or that invested it and it was just blah, blah, but actually didn't have an impact on the business. Yeah, many. Yeah, I mean, the UK government puts BIM level 2 as a policy on the clear the clear goals of halving carbon, reducing cost by 20%, and delivering faster. Right? That's how we signed up to BIM, and we're not seeing it in the broad economy.
Right.
So I still believe it's a necessary condition. It's not a sufficient condition. But we have all that upside, right? So it's like saying, right, the internet's going to revolutionize retail, and it's 1995, and there's these emergent little companies that you can buy things from, but it's really hard.
Yes.
Right? So few people are connected to the internet that you have no market. The internet technologies are not yet composable, so you can't do a SaaS web app.
Yeah.
Nobody has it mobile.
Yes.
Right? No, the logistics. Today, if I want to start a retail store, I build my website on Wix. Done. It runs on the internet, and millions, billions of people are connected. Done. I'm in China. I can collect money through WeChat. I'm in the West. I can collect money through Square. Immediate. I then need to organize the import of my product. 3PL do that. I now need to organize the delivery. 3PL do that. I now need to connect my website to the 3PL and transmit the order. I've got the technologies to do that. Lobster, etc. And then you say, now I need to serve my customer. Oh, I can externalize that or run Zendesk. And you say like, wow, in 2025, I can build an internet retail business in a week.
Yeah.
In 1995, it's a glimmer in my eyes. And I'd have to build it up.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that we are at this point where, things are starting to come in.
Yeah.
All lights are connected. Remember, and you probably don't, tomorrow's world. Tomorrow's world says in the future, the smart home. The smart home was such a big thing, domotique in French. Unbelievable. And it says, I clap my hands and the light will switch on. I'll speak to the house. Yeah, okay. And then you say, if I had to build all that switch cost me a lot of money, right? To recognize my voice, etc. But now you have internet, you have Bluetooth, you have Zigbee, you've got Alexa, and you say, hey, Alexa, switch on the light, and the light comes on. Marginal cost has gone to zero.
Yeah.
So we've got that infrastructure. Now, who's going to create the business models? Who are going to be the Jeff Bezos?
And I think the final question I have is, due to the physical nature of our industry, it potentially we might be thinking for a Jeff Bezos snap your finger moment, the world is different in 2 years, and it probably just it is not necessarily, it's not all cloud. It is a physical 20-year snap your fingers. 20 years is not a long period of time in the grand scheme of things.
So I think you put your finger on 2 or 3 really important things around that's driven by physicality and diversity of the built environment. First, the physicality means that we need our internet moment for the physical world. And okay, we've called that a digital twin. And then people want to sell that as a digital twin. But just forget what it's called. We're connecting the building to the digital realm. And I think that was needed. And that needs to go to zero. And it needs to... The second thing is clock speed of project and clock speed of data. We are in a world still formatted by SaaS, the SaaS explosion of the 2000s.
Yeah.
And so capital that is deployed, risk capital deployed in technology, is looking for SaaS metrics, which is time 3 in 8 years. That doesn't work. Those SaaS metrics don't work for all use cases. Yes, there will be some edge cases like marketplaces, infra market in India, but if you think about digital twin capabilities, it's going to be much more subtle. It's going to be, you've got a booking system for the building. Yes. Oh, that's great. And then how do you know which desks are free? How we've instrumented it? Are your users happy with that? Well, some are, some aren't. You remember, some people were happy to be on Facebook, some aren't.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be much more gradual. But then, as we always say, it's slowly, and then suddenly, right? and so where are these multiple inflection points where suddenly we have the sensors, we have the connectivity, we have the open data transfers, we have the business case, we have the thinkers, we've got the business leaders ready to back the idea and have the tolerance for failure. Yeah, and that's really, I think it's really, really important that it's not going to be a boom because it's so vast and our clock speed is so different. So clock speed of data, clock speed of project, big problem for SaaS investors, but not for real estate investors. So they gonna need to be those that drive the digital transformation, not the risk capital in technology.
Interesting.
And the first thing is, what are these composable technologies? So if I want to find a gap where we have a problem, is the composability of the technology. Other people call that the interoperability of the built environment. Now, what the vendors of those systems that have full of data, they want it to be closed systems, right? And so because that works well for their SaaS metrics, that works well for the idea that data is the new oil, so I'm keeping my oil. Right. Okay, but have you got enough of it? Is your oil valuable without some other mixing it with other things? It's not really oil, it's like chemicals. You have to mix them, right? So, there might be a sensors that know that we're here, but another sensor knows the temperature is going up, and another sensor is controlling the ventilation. Right. These three world need to suddenly have an inference engine, let's call that AI, that does something for us. Can this room become cognitive and do something for us? Right. Yes, it should. It's not great. It's not, transformational that, I can unzip and become less hot. But these transformational use cases are going to require data interoperability, which, we don't have.
Where are you racing yachts?
So I have a house on the Humble River in the South Coast. And so I've got direct access to the Solent where the America's Cup was born. And that's what I do.
Amazing.
And it's really interesting because when people talk about digital twins, I say, come on my yacht. And they say, why? I says, well, let me show you what's happening because, and this is a 40-year journey of building sensors that is measuring what's happening to the yacht. Yeah, I've got 3 or 4 computers running in parallel that are doing data acquisition, then performance, data cleansing, data rendering, performance calculation.
On top of typical like AIS depth sensor. This is additional ones that you've built.
No. Those are the standard one you install, but it becomes a metrology problem first because they, crap in, crap out. So you're saying, well, where am I? Actually, with GPS, that's super easy now. But how fast am I going? It's not easy. How fast you're going on Earth, that's easy. How fast am I going through the water as the water is moving because you have stream? That becomes hard because you're trying to measure your water speed. And to measure your water speed, you put a sensor in the water, but then you say, right, okay, is it calibrated if the water is flat calm, there is no tide, I can calibrate it. Yes, but as soon as you put the wave and the heel angle, you start introducing 1, 2, 3% of error.
And do you not use a GPS and speed over ground?
So yes, but the difference between my speed over ground and my calculated heading and water speed tells me what the tide is, and I'm trying to calculate. One of the things I'm trying to calculate is the tide, so that I can use the tide to my advantage. And if the tide is 20 to 30% of your boat speed in light weather and the Solent, you want to calculate the tide. You want to calculate the tide in real time. So you need to calculate what your boat speed is in real time. And calculating your boat speed in real time requires just being able to know, well, the boat is pointing in that way, but because it's sailing, it's actually got an angle of leeway. So what's my angle of leeway? And second, as I'm heeling, my sensor changes in the flow.
Right.
And however, I need to calibrate that out. And that's,
You're also, if you are leaning on this side, you're also dragging on that side as well.
Yes, so that's called leeway, because ultimately think about it as a wing in the water.
Yeah.
The wing in the water has an angle of attack. So I did aerodynamics and fluid mechanics. That was my degree using computers. Anyway, so...
But this is, the structure I had for the podcast, the first talking point, I think is in many ways the most interesting. It's actually your story and how you got to where you are. But I'd like you to, I hope you don't have to repeat yourself, but I think that is really interesting.
You can see there, I landed in the UK because of that. And then I did digital signal processing and low power early. And then from there, I went into automotive.
Yeah.
And then from there, I landed in the built environment in 2006. And I say, whoa, what's going on here? It's going to digitize, right? In 2006, I'm convinced that it's going to digitize. And here we are, 2024, and it still hasn't digitized.
Do you feel that it hasn't?
No, it hasn't.
It's happening.
So I have to be very cautious because in 2006, 2007, I think it's happening, right? Revit has happened. And I can talk about that, but so I think it's happening, and that's why I'm still here. And maybe now I'm in a position where I don't have the choice anymore. I have accumulated so much knowledge about the digital transformation of the built environment that I really want to see it through. So I can't say I'm gonna go and do AI or in augmented reality or something. Lots of geeky things you can do, but actually I'm so now passionate about the built environment and the people that work in it that I sort of beyond reason stay with it.
Is it a fair statement, though, that let's say the variables of today are different to 2006? You've got a lot of pressure from a sustainability perspective. It does make more financial sense today. In 2006, this was pre the 07, 08 crisis.
I think that's a really good question. I think are the drivers there, and in general, are the necessary condition for transformation in play, right? Because so one of the things that is worth exploring and establishing in terms of the podcast is so what did I achieve in my automotive days, right? And I think that beside all the learning of that industry and learning a second language always allows you to understand better.
Was that was in Asia?
So I did Europe and Asia, and in Europe, in the UK, actually, we created a business model innovation around servitization of a commodity. So as something commoditized, you look for ways to take control of the value chain and figure out different ways of making money. Now, this is now called digital transformation and business model. And there's the business model canvas for nonlinear business models. All that didn't exist, but in 1995, we sensed that we can sell a tire by the mile in the same way as Rolls-Royce launched Power by the Hour, and Phil Cartwright, which was advisor at Mace Innovation, did that. I was part of the similar team that generalized Tire by the Mile, and there's plenty to say there, but it's really an interesting business model transformation. And so then working with Lausanne IMD or MIT, you can show that to really create value through digital transformation, there is a strong hypothesis that you need to do business model transformation as well. But so, yes, are the drivers now sufficient? That's a top level country societal question.
And what do you think?
I think that in small segments, yes, it's certainly one driver transformation to the totality of the industry. But there are now really good segments where indeed what we call the insurgent, right? The incumbent doesn't want to transform.
Interesting. Okay.
The insurgent doesn't have a chance to transform until the conditions are right. Right. And so you can take every example of digital transformation of music or retail or movie rental, and then you get to observe that the incumbent loses because it's it's just inactive, it's reactive. It's trapped in its own logic, it's trapped in its own culture, it might be trapped into its capital base. So the Kodak example is a really good one that people examine, but it's really interesting to look at the capital view of the Kodak moment. Say, wait a minute, I'm an investor in Kodak. I've given my money to an industrial giant that is making film and selling it as photographic paper. If I wanted to invest in a company that's going to do digital things, right, I will take my money out of there and I'll put it into those digital companies. So I'm not expecting the board of Kodak to become a digital company. In fact, I would reason that that's a high risk. And so I want to mitigate and spread my risk. So I'm going to become an LP inside risk capital. That's my mandate. As a pension fund, I want to allow a board that is a safe, predictable industrial asset to, even if you've got all the patent for digital photography, great, heave those out into a company that is an IP company and license it all out.
Is that the only way? As in, Kodak has no chance, or is that a Kodak has a chance? They just need to remain.
No, you have to puzzle it out. And that's my experience with Michelin. So you have to puzzle it out. So one really interesting place is that if you start with a company that has an understanding of what it stands for, sometimes we call this purpose, but not necessarily from societal purpose, but Michelin is a mobility company. So it's often you say, well, why does this company have restaurant guides and sell stars? Those two are not adjacent categories. And you say, yeah, but you have to understand the history. At the beginning of the tire story in the 1890s, late 19th century, this is a really new product, the automobile. And so the people need to travel. And to travel, you need to know where to stop, where you're going to be able to put petrol, because there are no petrol stations, where you're going to be able to stop and have a meal, because motorway stations don't exist. In fact, for that matter, motorways don't exist, maps don't exist, and road numbering doesn't exist. So the company that is selling the tires say, I have a role to play here. My purpose is to help people move. The way I make money is I sell them tires. But if I help them move every day, then they'll remember me when they need a tire. And that's how they create the Maps and Guide division. And in fact, in 1889, they give the Michelin Guide to every person that buys a tire for free.
Yes.
And that gives them an index of where to stop, an index of where to refuel, etc. Right? And then they invent the maps. The road numbering system is a Michelin invention. The road numbering sign on all the sign of the French road is still called La Borne Michelin. It's a Michelin invention. And so if you start with that, then you say, what's the purpose of a truck? Is to move. What do they want to do? They want to variabilize their costs so that when they move a mile, they have a predictable cost per mile. I can do it with fuel. I can do it with leasing the truck. I can do it with my driver, but I can't do it with my tar. So if you turn up and you say, we're not going to sell you a tar, we're going to sell you a mile, and everything else we'll organize for you.
Fascinating.
They say, that's really interesting. There's a segment there of consumer that will say, I want to variabilize my cost, and you can then serve them.
I really think, and it's so interesting what you're saying, I think really when you think about the technology solutions in the industry, if they were to hear you say that, I think a few light bulbs will go off in a few heads, because they do not speak a construction company language. They don't speak a real estate company language. They think a product founder language. And
that's why I love what you guys are doing, is because ultimately, there is a technology conversation around understanding, is the technology powerful enough? Is the technology capable enough of what I want to do with my business? But first you have to say, what do you want to do with the business? And have that conversation. What's the art of the possible? How do I reorganize the business, right? Ultimately, that revolutionizing of retail by Jeff Bezos starts with, his conversation with this internet things happened. What might I do with it? And as an analyst, continues this bit and says, well, you know what? I'd regret all my life if I don't do one. So he jumps into doing one, right?
Yeah.
And so, but then this conversation of what's the art of the possible? What does the customer want? That's iterative, right? He himself is not a passionate reader or a librarian or a lover of books. It's just the best category to start retail on.
Yes.
For all sorts of good reasons that everybody knows in the textbook: long tail, cash flow, logistics, etc. So he hones on a category that works for what he wants to do, which is to revolutionize internet retail. And in fact, he starts with where most people are with technology. I'm going to do something that's impossible. I'm going to give better service, etc. And then he asks a few customers he has, and then they say, what I expect from you is price. And so he pivots the whole company onto price. You have to listen. You might start somewhere, and for sure you're going to end up somewhere else.
Yeah. So I think in order of to have a structure, we're going to spend 50% on you, and then we're going to spend 50% on the industry. Do you think that's a fair?
Yes, and so that's where I was going. The in 20, just so that you know, and then you can decide what makes the most interesting thing, right? Ultimately, in 2014, so I did 2 digital services startup, let's call them that way, and that brought me into the industry. And then in 2014, I instead of doing another startup, or frankly, I have another idea, or leaving the industry, I bumped into Buro Happold, and Buro Happold asked me, what should in their case, they use the technology word BIM story be? And I say, it's not BIM, it's digital transformation.
Interesting.
Right? And number one. And number two, you know everything you need to know about BIM. But what you don't have is a change journey and a strategy on what you want to do with it. And so they say, okay, help us think that through. And I do that for 6 weeks. And then they say, implement. And so that's how I ended up working with Buro Happold from that position of it's a change journey and it's a digital transformation strategy. That's what it's about. And so with Buro Happold, it was very fertile ground, and that's why I never left them. And then 3 years ago, they asked me to really become their CTO. But I don't think that's the really interesting story. The story is indeed that, I end up the CTO of Buro Happold because the CEO asked the right question.
Right.
And then listens to the answer, not in terms of technology, but in terms of it's change, and it's 5 minutes of strategy. When I say strategy, is what do you want from it? What do the Buro Happold partner, what do the Buro Happold employee want from it, and how does it align to what our business does?
So I think so that component, I would say, is very interesting. It's a unique story as well. It's a unique, even thinking the CEO asked the right questions, and that's what unlocked actually an array of opportunity. I think that's a strong talking point. I was going to ask you about, BIM has been around since the 80s. How does the digital transformation future of the real estate actually look? Are we in a different position to 2006 or 90s? People have been talking about it for a while. I would argue the variables are quite unique today. I wanted to get your opinion on it. And then I was also going to ask you, sustainability and technology, are the two merging together? Is it all now a sustainability question? And everything is a function of making an organization more sustainable for bigger margins? And then I was going to ask as a final question, what would be your advice to two people? A new executive, maybe just started today, and a new founder who's just started a company today.
And are we focused on real estate category or general social infrastructure and smart city all that way? Or because I advise UK government, Qatar government, NEOM.
We keep it pretty strict to just the built environment. But I mean,
built environment is a category that
includes both.
that immediately decompose into main big actors, right? The custodian and operator of the built environment. Sometime one, sometime split, and then those that intervene on it. And so the designers, the maintenance, the different crews, and the construction companies. And so you've got that view, and then of course it is highly geographic because context matters. But also you've got what government puts in place and what private sector puts in place, and then you've got what I call the social infrastructure, which is what the UK government puts in place, sometimes in partnership, but the trains, the roads, the waterways, the energy networks, and then the public realm, and then the social housing, and then the schools, and then the prison, and then the hospital. That's all what ultimately makes the social infrastructure versus the private infrastructure of I've got commercial real estate, I've got retail.
I know. I mean, the question basically, where do we focus? Because it's difficult to have sufficient depth when going too broad. For that, let's say I don't actually want to box it out. And because we do have public sector, private sector listeners.
But their dynamic is so different, right?
Yeah.
I think what we can talk about is the role of government is setting up an ecosystem, and the role for policy in driving the transformation. Is the transformation possible without a forcing function from policymakers?
Yes.
Right.
And then does that make us as an industry over reliant, or do we on governments? I suppose we always have been.
We are, I mean, I don't want to digress, but if you look at the Uberization of taxis, right, and mobility, you get to a point really quickly where the policymaker completely missed the point sometime. And sometimes they're batting for the incumbent, sometimes they miss the point, and sometimes they're really proactive. So in New York, they're batting for the incumbent, protecting the taxi license, blah, 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 right? And then the insurgent just goes to war. In London, we tolerated them, but then we missed the point. The point was, with the digital technology and the variabilization of supply side, the technology-enabled solution of Uber or Lyft is better than what the beautiful taxi people that we've got. They've got great vehicle, they've got the knowledge, etc. But so you really have to say, what kind of company do we want the new taxi company be? And if you let them decide how they apply pricing, if you let them decide how you count for when they're working and not working and apply the minimum wage regulation, then they have an American, aggressive, combative, capital-driven company setting essentially labor policy in your city. That's not acceptable to me.
Right.
And that's the point. That's the conversation we want to have. Whereas if you then go to Singapore, they say, who is Uber? I mean, every taxi's already got GPS, and you can already order a taxi by SMS. And it's 1995, by the way. And so you're going like, how do you even insert Uber in that ecosystem where the customer is already served? They say, well, yeah, but the issue here is at some time when it rains at 5 o'clock in Singapore, you're going to have an undersupply of taxi. So if you can variabilize the supply side, then that's...
What I'm going to flip it to you. What is the key question? What keeps you up at night? What is the key question to ask where you can extract the most value?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The key question is indeed, what is the forcing function? That if the assumption is with technology in the 21st century, we can solve the built environment problems more elegantly, more efficient. So the question is that hypothesis right? Any evidence? Number one. And number two, how do you make it happen? And is it the role of capital? Is it the role of buyers? Is it the role of government? Right? And how do we make that conversation move forward?
Okay, I mean, so if the hypothesis currently is, and I'm not saying that it is, but if the hypothesis is, are we technologically fit to solve today's problems? Is it a case of going for the low-hanging fruit? What do you think the industry needs to be thinking about then?
So I think if we focus on the technology point, we have to understand that fitness of the technology has a role to play, and any vendor will always come and tell you my technology is ready. Yeah.
Yes.
And big surprise, not quite ready. That's what they call product market fit, etc. Right? And so we have so many examples, and I think it's really important to think about it in those, like the idea that we were going to replace USB sticks with some cloud technology. All the cloud technology vendors said, this is going to be the thing, etc. And eventually it happens, but let's understand what are the trigger in the history of adoption of technology, is really interesting. Of course, it needed to have an infrastructure in place. So, it works once everybody is connected to the internet, and that's not part of the value proposition. I don't have to start with, I'll connect you to the internet and then you can remove your USB stick. You are already connected. So this addition, one part, and the other part is, and that's the beautiful thing, is the value proposition of Dropbox is expressed into a green tick. So if you ask 10 years before what was the unlocking technology for cloud collaboration, they would have talked to you about bandwidth, IP networks, network switch, on all sorts of things. But actually what we do know now is that the onboarding of the technology through the green tick is the crucial moment. Is the crucial moment when Dropbox become a half unicorn, when Steve Jobs offers to buy his Dropbox. He offers it because they've got traction, they've got adoption, and that adoption is not just timing, it's a green tick. Who would have thought that technology transformation of removing the USB stick and making cloud collaboration work was all going to be about user interface, etc. So it's really important that all these technology startup firms, so if I say, what's your green tick? Because I'm sure it solves a great problem.
And just so what do you mean by the green tick in Dropbox's example?
So the green tick in Dropbox is fascinating to me because it expresses what the product does. Grandma gets it. Says, Grandma, we're going to share photos. Oh, yeah, whatever. And then they say, well, how does it work? And say, well, I could explain IP and cloud, or I could say, there is this blessed folder. When there's a green tick, the photos are in it. If you add a photo to this folder, it will work, and then it's going to be green tick. It means everybody else that has the green tick can see the photo. It expresses the fundamental value proposition of collaboration through that blessed folder into a simple way, right? And it's really, really fascinating that on-ramp and adoption of the technology then becomes radically democratic because people don't need to understand anything else. But if the folder has a green tick, it's done.
An interesting statement that was said at our conference. There are a lot of great solutions out there today. And then there are a lot of good solutions, but the good solutions have far more impact because the implementation was 10 times better. Do you agree with that statement? As an avid lover of technology, and good technology, I'd imagine, what do you think about that idea?
Yes, I think that adoption is value, right? Things that got adopted are creating value. So any solutions that are in a drawer somewhere and not adopted, they're in the drawer. And so they're not creating value. And we really need to get out of bed to change things, not to invent super clever things. What I think that is really interesting in those conversations is that there's so much in the drawer there that's not made it into adoption, because the people that invent these really clever things are rarely those that can then express them. I don't know if you saw the patent related to HTML, which is foundational. Tim Berners-Lee, So his paper, I think it was a paper rather than a patent, his supervisor says, it's interesting, intriguing and interesting, not sure what is it for, right? So
for HTML.
So Tim Berners-Lee invents essentially the World Wide Web with HTML, which is an additional technology to TCP/IP and the internet technologies and the networking technologies. So that's a really important concept of composable, stackable, additional technologies. So the HTML happens because we already have all these Unix network of connected universities and research, etc. And that happens because we've got TCP/IP. And TCP/IP happens because it's one version of networking, and the military have a really interesting view of that technology. It's inefficient from an information management and bandwidth management point of view, but it's highly resilient. So they were looking for a networking technology that would survive a nuclear attack. So a decentralized technology like TCP/IP allows you to remove network node and the thing keeps running. So they fund it. Then because of the exponentiality of technology, then the fact that it's inefficient from a networking bandwidth point of view goes away. Just wait how many months of Moore's law to apply. And then you're left with a decentralized, highly resilient TCP/IP network. And then on top of it, you put the internet, and on top of it, you put HTML. And when the HTML is released to the world, people don't really see how it's going to be useful. And then Netscape happens, and they release Mosaic, and then they make money on the server side, and that history. So it starts from in a cupboard over there. There are loads of technology for the built environment that we've not scaled yet.
Right. And so, we at the beginning of this podcast, I asked, does you've been in Buro Happold since 2006, so that's
So Buro Happold 2014.
2014.
And
Right.
and I came from what I would call the apprenticeship in the built environment. So I really landed in the built environment by accident. I'm asked to run and scale a service company that just when BIM happens. So Revit is acquired by Autodesk, and all sorts of things happen around that digitization through BIM. But at that moment, then I start looking and say, oh, digitization of the built environment is starting. And if you remember, in 2011, government announces the UK policy for BIM level 2. And so by 2011, I'm convinced it's going to happen, and I stayed. But I started by accident, and then I met wonderful people.
The question is, has the built environment got has it got what it needs to go through the same sort of transformation that other industries, banking, a number of industries that have gone through a full, what seems to be a clear digital transformation, or is it not yet? Is it certain segments? What does it look like?
I think it's going to be some certain segments, right? Because ultimately, what I think I'm often saying is all industries like Asia. Everybody knows it, but if I'm telling you tomorrow I'm going to Asia, you don't know whether I'm eating an idli in Bangalore or a pad thai in Thailand or some Peking duck in China, right? Or a sushi in Japan. You really don't know what language I'm speaking, what culture I'm in. So all industries like Asia, so we really have to segment it. So I think there are segments that are going to be more amenable, and are going to start first. So that's the first thing I would say. And then those segments, I think you have this really strong battle between the insurgent and the incumbent.
Right.
And so always, the incumbent has a way of making money and want to shift. And however much they go on stage and say they want to shift, they don't, right? And so
Interesting.
So remember that the music industry is one that we all saw transform. What we need to examine a little bit what really happened. For example, Apple didn't want to digitally get into the music business. It's an accident, right? We know that because they signed away the rights to do business in music to Apple Records, right? So it's on public record that Apple didn't want to go into the music industry. So that's how we know it's an accident. We also know that they invent the iPod, 1,000 songs in our pocket. So it's really interesting that what makes it take hold is people talking about it in non-technical terms. I'm going to put 1,000 songs in your pocket. It's really clear. I'm not talking about there is an MP3 player. The dominant player was Rio. they never went anywhere because they didn't have a conversation for what the public wanted to do. And finally, we know that the music industry that knew how to make money on the high street selling plastic, right? And for them, digitization had essentially been a shift from selling vinyl to selling polycarbonate, if polycarbonate is what the CD is made out of. So the people that made money out of digitization in the first wave are Sony and Philips, who had the patent for the CD and sold loads of machines. And reluctantly, the music industry, they were annoyed because they now had to have 2 items of stock in their shops for one sale, and they couldn't even charge more for the CD because there was this whole debate: is it better? Is it more durable? Why would I buy a CD versus the vinyl, right? And to this day, people think the vinyl has better sound qualities and all that. So it's really interesting that they completely missed the point. And in fact, the moment where the insurgent win, Apple wins, is first, the industry is getting really upset that we are ripping our songs, right? It's becoming like so easy to rip your song and fill in 1,000 songs in your pocket. And Steve Jobs says to the industry, let me sell, right? I'll put 99 cents on the pocket, I'll sell it through iTunes, etc. And by the way, you could be streaming. Look at Napster. Oh yeah, we shut them down, right? So they were shutting down the sites, they were shutting down the ripping side, they were saying to Steve Jobs, this will never work. And eventually they relent. And what's really interesting is they relent because they started making more money selling ringtones. So the digital revenue of music started to exceed the physical revenue of sales. So if you had a mildly successful, top 50 single, they turn it into a 10 to 20 second ringtone, and they sold those for €1 to €4, and that made more money for them than selling the single. And that's when they finally relented and says, this is now unstoppable, right? But at that moment, they had lost every opportunity they've had. Imagine, with what you know now, and you're a record store, you say, right, I'm going to put thousands and thousands of songs on the hard drive in the back room, and I'm going to put all the songs that you can buy in the front. I'll have just one case with the cover, and then when you are queuing and say, I want this one, I'll print the CD, I'll print the cover, and you'll walk out, right? I don't even have to have it in stock to sell it to you. That's what you would have done. And then Virgin Music, HMV, all the music industry, the high street would still be populated with places where you listen to the song, you meet the artist, you choose to buy the CD, and you buy the digital song and the physical one, and you walk out of the front door. Did they do that? No, they went back. and so that's the battle between the insurgent and the incumbent. The incumbent never gets it.
If I may challenge it, yet the disruptor in many industries does not replace the incumbent; it only enhances it. I would look at insurance as an initial example. A lot of insurance. There's an amusing saying where it's never really sold; it's bought because you need it. Make a claim, and insurance went through quite an interesting digital transformation with something called embedded insurance. So with every product you buy, it actually becomes it's enhancing the offering for the customer. They don't really know it, and it's enhancing the ability to sell insurance for the carrier. So it's not really a competitive thing, it's actually more of an enhancing thing. And that was what ignited a big digital transformation in insurance. Does the real estate industry, does it not relate a little bit more towards those sorts of incumbents where they can actually get more out of a portfolio, they can get a higher profit margin out of an asset. They can, especially construction costs are high, they can actually lower construction costs, and get more valuable assets once again. is it not really not an us against them question, but more of a how can we work together question?
I'd like to think that. Obviously, we've learned a lot, and I think the insurgent has an advantage in B2C, right? So when you reintermediate the consumer, then you have, and it also takes the incumbent to forget the music and not to really know, right? So we're in a world which is much more mature, and I'd subscribe to your view that is that complementarity, because ultimately a real estate company needs to think about my customer is renting space and is, let's say I'm commercial real estate, and says, right, what makes this space so valuable is the ecosystem around it and is the activity in it. Now, how can I complement that digitally? And I mean, you can see here, you walk into the building and you have an app, and that app is connected to a supply side of services. You become the customer, that they are the portal to that customer, and then get onto the revenue stream. So you can imagine, space as a service. You can imagine servitizing and real estate company really focusing on that, community buildings, the social impact they have in the environment, and turning that into revenue, etc., etc. So we've learned so much.
What does the next 5 years look like for the industry? I know you don't have a crystal ball, but
Well, I can't predict. I always say he's going to radically digitally transform.
we haven't talked about AI as well.
So AI is one topic that deserves a whole podcast. But I think that I come back to, this industry is like 1995 retail, pre-internet, right?
Okay.
So and maybe now it's 98. But so the idea that we know that transformation is going to unfold, and we have got all the learnings from other industry, then what can we compose and learn? So I'm really excited that technology is going to transform delivery. I think that's really an important one, and I see it all over the world, that accelerating delivery through robotics, through different contract form. You have different ways of accelerating, and is technology finally, number one, powerful enough, and number two, composable enough, and number three, is there a driver? Because ultimately the construction companies will plead poverty because they're a price offer, they're not a value offer. So as a price offer, you have to say, I can't go any lower. Look, I have no margin, right?
Yeah.
That's what. But actually, when you examine, I think their return for capital employed, if you just look at it, return on capital employed with negative capital employed is really, it's just they're offering securities to take a contract, doesn't look that bad. Yeah. But yes, they're taking a risk. And then you have this whole question around risk, reinsuring it, who created it, etc. But I think revolutionizing construction is going to happen, and for simple reason is that the situation we find ourselves in is unacceptable, and it's unacceptable from a sustainability point of view and an equity point of view. So the fact that my kids can't afford a home with a normal job means that something's broken, right? We have not unlocked supply side. Now, and we really need to think about how we might unlock supply side, and say, but we've got 8 house builders delivering 90+%. So,
And it's still not enough.
and it's not that is not enough. It's that from an economist point of view, that means that I'll constrain supply. Yeah, well, Ferraris are valuable because they're desirable. They're desirable and not available. But I think they built more Lada because ultimately in Russia you used to queue for your car, so you had no choice. Yeah, what came, and does it work? No, you've got one, right? Housing, does it work? It's a bit small. They've played me. The house not really durable. Foundation don't look. But I've got one. So, they're selling ladders from or Austin Allegros maybe, for the price of Volkswagens or, and my analogy will break down soon, but, that inequation between demand side and supply side, we really need to look at. And we also have to look at they're highly optimized for big sites, right? And so, let's not look at redensifying our cities and all the complex sites that we could develop. No. Let's not look there. There's probably 10 to 15% of site availability in London. Let's go for the brown belt or the green belt, because there I know how to build predictably the way I've always done. Give me big sites, I make big money. Give me small site, I don't know how to do. So let's claim there are no small sites and demand from government to release big site, right? So that's what plays out in different geographies. But for example, in France, I was talking to a cool startup that was just doing data mining of the urban realm on behalf of mayors, because when the mayor wants to release sites outside their city, before they can build out there, they have to demonstrate with evidence that there are no further sites to be developed inside the city. Now, that's a really nice data problem. Mine the site, mine the geography. You've got Cesium, you've got Google Earth, you've got AI. Mine the whole thing. Tell me where I could build, and then let's start examining where it works. And for sure, and this is the big insight, it does not work if you build it traditionally. Give me an estate, I'll bring my trucks, I'll do a bit of site. Traditional construction by mega house builders doesn't work for that redensification.
That was actually going to be my, I guess, final question, is we are comparing today's circumstances to a very finite and particular set of circumstances that existed, I guess, from the 1950s to maybe 1980, 90s. Before that, for most of human history, we actually had slaves. We had a very small selection of owners, and then there was almost a you sort of have to work on the land. You just don't get to choose it. You're working on the land. You don't own it. Somebody else does. Then there's a small part in history where we have a boom in productivity. Everybody owns for a while, and then it shifts again to a small amount of owners. Everybody works. The only difference is you're not forced onto a particular house. You then get paid in cash, and then you rent again, but you still don't own. I guess the question is there a restraint that stops this the circumstances, these good circumstances that we're comparing today to? Is there a constraint, or are we almost doomed to current circumstances of never owning forever? Or is there something we can do?
That becomes philosophical and political, which that's thinning eyes. I'm not a behavioral economist or an economist, but I think I would recognize that the structure of how housing is delivered is central to into making affordability. So if you look at different geographies, then again we can get some insights. I think you can go back in history, but for example, in Singapore, we have the Housing Development Board, and really the first thing that at the societal level the Singapore government wants to understand is availability of quality housing for all, right? And then after that, you walk into how do they participate in the economic growth of that capital that is tied into the real estate, and they've got really interesting models. Similarly, you've got the government of Canada looking with the housing challenge around unlocking sites, but unlocking finance and then unlocking ownership. And so it's really important that, yes, technology, blah, blah, but we can apply it to solve all sorts of things, and it's important. But there is that whole, a policy and economic model around it that needs to be fixed. But the economic model conversation is a more political one and a philosophical one, but it needs to be challenged because it's stilted as we were just into give me big plots of land and then I'll turn it into a house, right? What we can't do is to say, right, actually, does housing construction have a cost problem? No, it doesn't. Actually, affordability of construction is no problem. It's affordability of the land, right? So if we look at if we look at the affordability in the UK specifically, in London more specifically, you're going, well, why is it so expensive? Well, first, because everybody wants to be in London. Why does everybody want to be in London? Because the economic balance our country is not like federal Germany. Nobody's built a transport network to balance the economy. Oh, why not? Because all the people that are complaining about how housing isn't affordable are also complaining with let's not build train network. Right? So interesting conversation there just to start. But then we say, okay, we need 1.5 million houses. Can you build them that quick? Yes, that's where technology helps, right? Technology helps if you can reintegrate the supply chain and synchronize and orchestrate the supply chain. Now, if I'm not under pressure, if my model works, why would I invest in technology to deliver housing quicker? Remember, all house builders, if they go slower, like Ferrari, make more money. So why would I invest in robots? Why would I invest in reducing risk and accelerating delivery? Contracting by creating the contract, creates risk at every interface in the contract. That explosion is what happened in from mid-century onwards. So we've got so many different things to unpack. But yes, technology will help with speed. I think two things that technology also can help is very important is predictability. Now, if I can't predictably deliver a product on time to a given quality and to a given performance, I cannot sell that, right? So you imagine you walked into a car company and you say, I'm going to buy a car. And they're going to say it's going to have fantastic fuel consumption and it's going to be very durable and it's going to be super comfortable. And I can get it to you on the 1st of Jan, right? Today is the 15th of December. And actually, for the last 100 years, all cars you received had defects. Like all of them had defects. All of them were late. All of them were to a similar but different specification. Oh yeah, I know you ordered the sunroof, but we value the engineering result because we committed to a price. And then we worked with your team and they, the family, they decided that they'd rather have the car without a sunroof rather than no car at all, right? And so we value engineered the sunroof arc. That's not value engineering. That's cost cutting and removing the delight of driving with a sunroof, right? Oh, and yeah, the engine, we had to put an old diesel in. So sustainability is not so that thing for the last 100 years, you never get the product, you never get it on time, never get it to the performance you want. And now you turn up and you say, I'm going to sell you something that's better. I'm spend a bit more and you'll save on fuel. Save even more and I'll remove and I'll put an electric engine in it. Do you buy from that company? Never. There's an economics theory called the Akerlof-Lemon that tells you that. So the first thing you need to fix with delivery is predictability. If I can predictably deliver a product on time, on performance, then I can start selling performance.
That is a fascinating point. That's a fascinating point. There's there's a structural component that's going to change. That's going to change how contractors actually deliver. That is a really fascinating point.
And for a real estate company now, it starts allowing you to say, right, I'm going to be able to build real estate that delivers more predictably higher value to my tenants. So I completely change my value model of how I invest in real estate because now I can get predictably performance at a low risk that I'm going to be able to resell. So suddenly, as a real estate companies like selling high value, high performance, highly sustainable cars rather than selling, ladders. Try to do a business selling ladders and be high.
It's interesting. I'd imagine these real estate companies, they, when they even take on a new contract, they are truly thinking every single thing that I can come up with so that there is not an additional hidden cost and that the whole thing runs perfectly. It will never happen.
So I think this is what you call orchestration, right? Ultimately, and I don't think we have to look at what happened before and be negative about it. I think you just have to take stock. Now, the last buildings that really got delivered quickly and in integrated ways, like the Royal Festival Hall in London, got delivered by what became our MJM architects, but they were in-house to the council, and they delivered that building in 2 years. So really, now you move the thing forward, and it says now it's all disaggregated. Different people take the risk, then they can be insured for that risk. Number one, then all the buildings become incredibly complicated, right? And much more demanding in terms of performance, safety, etc. So you say, right, and we've not been able in wisdom methods, today's method of delivery, let's not even call it contracting or construction, today's mechanism for delivery have not kept up with the demand, the increased complexity, the increased risk, the increased sophistication of the market. And so now we have to say, right, but we've not absorbed technology either. Can technology help us address this complexity? And I say, of course we can, right? So look at the RIBA stages. What's happening is you're making decisions, and you're making decisions based on the information you've got that is encoded in drawings and documents. Now, it's really fascinating that you then say, well, at 1 to 100, I've got this level of information, and my brain can cope with that. And you say, yeah, but we're not going to use your brain. We're going to use your brain and a computer. And actually, the cost of making the decisions that are going to come later, let's make some level of decision and orchestration with computers today. Then suddenly you say, I can make better decisions. Yes, but don't try to make the decision based on the information you always had. Now that you have a computer, right? And then say, but therefore I need to be able to understand the design much further down the line, right? That's what BIM was about. In part, is to be able to represent semantically the design and then be able to develop it much further and then make a decision for capital investment, which is, early on. And then after that, just in an integrated way, look at the complexity of delivery as one. Stop decomposing the stages.
I think we covered to a good degree, many aspects of the industry. And a point that was interesting, also covering from a founder's perspective, understanding customers. I think that was a really key point. One final point, because I think we are running into time a little bit. One final point would be advice for let's say a new executive who's just entered, let's say real estate. What would the advice be, considering what we've talked about and what the next few years probably hold?
So, the advice is to be, hugely excited because, it's 1995, internet retail hasn't happened, or whichever industry you might, and you're going to be the one delivering that. So it's really fascinating to think about it. How exciting is that, right? And something's going to change, but also remember that your board doesn't really get it, or if it does and want to get it, it counts on you to have a trust and manage that conversation. Don't be too enthusiastic about technology and shiny things, and be much more focused on building the trust from the board and painting a picture, building a narrative, and building a roadmap that says, right, look, we can take this business into a new direction, because there's no reason why Barnes and Nobles didn't remain the brand through which you choose books, right? In the world that has digitized, right? I even hesitate to call that the internet, because, you know, my grandparents never went on the internet. They use their iPad every day, right? And so eventually it becomes ubiquitous and it's the new normal. So, you know, talk about that new normal, those business opportunity, and find the company that wants to do that. If that's your passion, you know, if you're joining in as a, you know, CIO, CDO, or somebody is there interested to say, look, this digital thing, you know, you explain to us how it changes the company, then you know, have that conversation, be hugely excited, and there's so much to implement.
Fantastic. It's been a really, really engaging podcast. Thanks for joining.
Pleasure. There's so much to be done, and you know, I think you guys have got a great position and a great mission.